Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jackson never imagined that a holiday party could destroy 15 years of marriage. He stood by the drinks table, holding a glass of whiskey he'd barely touched, watching Amelia across the room. She was laughing loudly, chatting animatedly with a group of co-workers Jackson didn't know. The soft light from the chandelier reflected off the navy blue dress she'd chosen for that evening, the same one he'd complimented just hours earlier when they left the house. At that moment, everything seemed normal. Amelia was radiant, and Jackson felt a quiet pride at being there, finally attending an event from her professional world. Amelia had worked as a project manager at a tech company for 7 years. It was a mid-sized firm with around 200 employees, specializing in financial sector software development. She always spoke highly of the workplace, her colleagues, and the challenges. Jackson, meanwhile, was a civil engineer at a construction firm. His schedule was demanding, and he rarely managed to attend social events related to Amelia's job. So when she invited him to the company's annual party, he accepted without hesitation. It was a chance to meet the people she spent most of her days with and better understand that world she so often mentioned at home. The party was being held in an event hall downtown, decorated with subtle lighting, round tables draped in white linens, and a small stage where a band played soft jazz. About 150 people were in attendance, employees and a few guests. Jackson had been introduced to at least 20 of Amelia's co-workers in the first 2 hours. Most were friendly, greeting him politely before returning to work-related conversations he couldn't follow. A few, however, seemed oddly uncomfortable around him. They'd quickly avert their gaze, make vague remarks, and step away as soon as possible. Jackson tried not to dwell on it. Maybe they were just shy. Maybe they didn't know how to interact with a colleague's spouse. Still, a nagging feeling that something was off began to settle in the back of his mind, a shadow he couldn't entirely ignore. Amelia was unusually lively that night. She moved confidently through the room, greeting some, hugging others, laughing at jokes Jackson couldn't hear. At one point, she came back to him, took his hand, and led him over to a table where a few company executives were seated. That's when Jackson met Charles. He was the vice president of operations, a man in his mid-40s with neatly trimmed gray hair, a flawless suit, and a smile that seemed carefully calculated. Charles shook Jackson's hand firmly, asked a few polite questions about his job, and then shifted his full attention to Amelia. They started talking about a project she was leading, and Jackson stood there, whiskey glass in hand, trying to look engaged. The conversation lasted a few minutes until the band started playing a slower song. Charles looked at Amelia and, with a charming smile, asked if she'd dance with him. Amelia hesitated for a split second, glanced quickly at Jackson, who nodded calmly, and accepted. Jackson watched them walk to the dance floor. There was no reason to be suspicious. It was just a dance. He'd even encouraged it. But as he watched them, something started to bother him. The way Charles placed his hand on Amelia's waist was too intimate. The closeness between their bodies was unnecessary for a casual office dance. And worst of all, Amelia was smiling in a way Jackson hadn't seen in years. A genuine, relaxed, almost, loving smile. They laughed together, whispered things he couldn't hear, and the chemistry between them was so obvious it made his chest tighten. When the song ended, Amelia leaned close to Charles's ear, whispered something, and gave him a subtle smile. Then she returned to where Jackson stood, picked up her purse, and said she was going to the restroom. He nodded, trying to seem calm, but something inside him was already on high alert. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. Jackson checked his wristwatch, struggling to control the rising anxiety. Amelia still hadn't come back. He began walking through the hall, discreetly searching for her. He passed by the hallway leading to the restrooms, she wasn't there. He returned to the main room, checked the tables, the buffet area, the bar. Nothing. Then he felt a light touch on his shoulder. Jackson turned to see a young man, probably mid-20s, wearing a simple suit and a slightly crooked tie. The guy looked nervous, glancing around before speaking, as if afraid someone might catch him talking to Jackson. He leaned in and, in a low, almost whispered voice, said something that made Jackson's world stop for a moment. "Sorry, man, but I think you should know. Your wife's having an affair with our boss. I just saw them in the parking lot." Jackson stood frozen, processing the words. The young man continued, still uneasy. "I know it's tough to hear, but everyone here knows. It's been going on for months. I couldn't stand seeing you here without knowing the truth. I'm really sorry." Before Jackson could respond, the young man quickly slipped away into the crowd. Jackson felt his breath catch. His legs grew heavy, as if rooted to the floor. The band's music in the background sounded distant, muffled. He tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation, but something about what he just heard rang too true. The strange looks from Amelia's co-workers. The way she and Charles danced. The timing of her disappearance right afterward. It all clicked into place in a painful, unavoidable way. Jackson pulled out his phone, hands trembling slightly, and walked out of the hall toward the parking lot. The cold night air hit his face but brought no relief. He moved between parked cars, scanning the area, until he heard voices from a distant corner near a black SUV. Jackson approached slowly, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. And then he saw them. Amelia and Charles were behind the SUV, partly hidden in the shadows but visible enough for Jackson to see every detail clearly. They were kissing. Not a quick, discreet, regretful kiss, but a deep, passionate one that left no room for doubt. Charles's hands moved over Amelia's back, holding her waist with familiarity. Her fingers were tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. They were completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to everything around them. Jackson felt a mix of anger, pain, and a strange, icy calm take hold. He didn't yell. He didn't run toward them. He didn't make a scene. Instead, he pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and started recording. He captured every second, every movement, every kiss, every whisper. The parking lot lighting was dim but sufficient to show exactly what was happening. Jackson recorded for nearly 2 minutes, making sure he had undeniable proof of what he was witnessing. Then he turned off the camera, slipped the phone into his pocket, and simply turned around. He walked back inside, retrieved his coat from check-in, nodded politely to a few people he passed, and walked out the front door. No one noticed. No one asked questions. Jackson got into his car, started the engine, and drove home in complete silence. When he arrived, he took off his suit, put on comfortable clothes, and sat on the living room couch. He didn't cry. He didn't break anything. He just sat there, staring into space, trying to process what he'd just seen. Hours later, around 2 in the morning, Amelia came home. She walked in, clearly surprised to find him awake. She asked where he'd been, why he'd left without saying anything. Jackson simply replied that he hadn't been feeling well and had gone home early. Amelia seemed to accept that, gave him a quick kiss on the forehead, and went to bed. Jackson stayed on the couch until sunrise. The next morning, he waited for Amelia to leave for work. Then he pulled out his phone, opened the video he'd recorded the night before, and watched it again. The pain returned, but this time, it came with cold determination. Jackson wasn't going to let this slide. He wasn't going to pretend he hadn't seen it. He wasn't going to be treated like a fool. He opened his laptop, searched for his wife's company website, and found information about their corporate code of conduct. The company had a clear policy against romantic relationships between employees at different hierarchical levels, particularly between supervisors and their direct reports. As vice president, Charles was technically Amelia's superior in the chain of command. Additionally, the ethics code explicitly prohibited inappropriate behavior at corporate events. Jackson found contact information for both Human Resources and the Compliance Director. He wrote a formal email, attached the video, and sent it to both. The message was simple and direct. It reported that he'd witnessed two employees engaging in conduct that violated company policies during an official event, and he was sharing the evidence so appropriate action could be taken. He didn't mention that one of them was his wife. He didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. 3 days passed. Jackson kept to his routine, acting as if nothing were wrong. Amelia suspected nothing. She kept going to work, coming home at the usual time, chatting about trivial matters over dinner. Jackson replied with one-word answers, but she didn't seem to notice. On Wednesday afternoon, Amelia's phone rang. She was in the living room, working on her laptop, when she answered. Jackson was in the kitchen making coffee but could clearly hear the conversation. Her tone shifted instantly, became tense, defensive. She said she needed to go to the office right away to handle something urgent and left in a hurry. Jackson knew what was happening. HR had seen the video. Amelia came home hours later, completely shaken. She walked in with red eyes, smeared makeup, and trembling hands. Jackson was sitting on the couch, waiting. She started talking, stumbling over her words, trying to explain. She said she'd been fired. That someone had sent a video of her and Charles to HR. That she was being accused of inappropriate conduct. That Charles had also been fired. That her career was ruined. Jackson listened in silence, showing no emotion. When she finished, he calmly asked, "Do you have anything to say to me, Amelia?" She hesitated. Looked at him, then at the floor, then at her hands. Then she started crying. She tried to downplay it, saying it had been a mistake, that she was confused, that Charles had taken advantage of her. Jackson didn't want to hear it. He stood up, pulled out his phone, and showed her the video. Amelia turned pale. She reached for the phone, but Jackson pulled it away. She dropped to her knees, begging, saying she could explain, that it wasn't what it looked like. Jackson just shook his head. 15 years, Amelia. 15 years of marriage. 2 kids. And you threw it all away for him. She tried to justify herself, but Jackson wouldn't let her. He said he'd already contacted a lawyer and that divorce proceedings would begin immediately. Amelia screamed, cried, pleaded, but Jackson had already made up his mind. He left the house that night and checked into a hotel. In the days that followed, he began organizing everything: the division of assets, custody of the children, necessary paperwork. The divorce process was swift and painful. Jackson had hired a family law attorney right after their confrontation, and together they built a solid case. In addition to the video, Jackson's lawyer obtained text message and email records proving how long the affair had lasted. It turned out that Amelia and Charles's relationship had gone on for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The attorney also collected statements from co-workers who confirmed the affair was common knowledge. Amelia tried to fight back, but she had no strong arguments. During negotiations, it became clear she was at a disadvantage. Jackson had documented proof, witnesses, and a clean record. Amelia's lawyer suggested she accept a settlement to avoid an even more humiliating public trial. In the end, it was agreed that Jackson would have primary custody of their 2 children, 13-year-old Sarah and 10-year-old Lucas. Amelia would get regular weekend visitation on alternating weekends, provided she maintained adequate financial and emotional stability. Jackson also kept the house, since that's where the children were settled and it would be less disruptive for them. The asset division was relatively balanced by legal standards, but because the house was the couple's largest asset, Jackson came out significantly ahead. Amelia was entitled to half the value of certain investment accounts and one of the cars. She left the house with personal belongings, some agreed-upon furniture, and little else. In the weeks that followed, she tried repeatedly to contact Jackson, through long messages, emails, voicemails. He ignored them all. He'd blocked her number on all his devices, communicating only through his lawyer regarding the children. In the months that followed, Jackson focused on rebuilding his life. He got the kids into therapy to help them process their parents' separation. Sarah was furious with her mother, and weekend visits were tense and filled with silence. She responded with one-word answers when Amelia tried to talk, refusing to share anything about her life. Lucas, being younger, was confused at first, but gradually began to understand that sometimes people make choices that hurt those they love. Jackson threw himself back into work, accepted a major project that required occasional travel, and started spending more time with friends. He wasn't ready for a new relationship, but he wasn't stuck in the past either. The pain was still there, but it was beginning to heal. As for Amelia, the news that reached Jackson wasn't good. She'd obviously lost her job and was struggling to find another in her field. Her termination for misconduct was on her employment record, making job interviews difficult. On top of that, word of the scandal had spread quickly through professional circles in the city. Amelia had moved back in with her mother in a more distant neighborhood and was doing freelance work just to cover basic expenses. As for Charles, Jackson heard through a mutual acquaintance that he'd returned to his ex-wife. Apparently, after losing his job and facing public scandal, Charles realized it wasn't worth throwing away a 20-year marriage over a brief affair. He'd begged his wife for forgiveness, promised to change, and surprisingly, she took him back. Amelia was left completely out in the cold, discarded as if she'd never mattered at all. Jackson felt a bitter satisfaction upon hearing this. It wasn't exactly revenge, it was simply justice. 6 months after the divorce, Jackson was at the grocery store doing his weekly shopping when he saw Amelia. She was alone, pushing an almost empty cart, wearing simple clothes and no makeup. Her once flawless hair was pulled into a messy ponytail. She looked tired, aged, as if she'd lost the spark she used to have. For a moment, their eyes met. Amelia stopped, as if she wanted to say something, but Jackson simply looked away and kept walking. There was nothing left to say. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Jackson moved forward with his life. In the months that followed, he accepted an invitation to go out with a coworker, returned to the gym regularly, and even took the kids on vacation to national parks, creating new memories. Sarah and Lucas were adjusting well to their new routine. The house felt calmer now, free from the constant tension that had marked the final months of the marriage. Jackson realized that while the betrayal had been devastating, it had also freed him from a relationship that hadn't been healthy for a long time. He didn't forgive Amelia. He probably never would. But he no longer carried the weight of anger. He'd moved on, and that was enough. One night, nearly a year after the divorce, Jackson sat in his backyard watching the stars when Sarah came over to him. She asked if he was happy. Jackson paused to think before answering. He said yes, that he was happy. Not in the same way as before, but in a new way, more aware, more honest. Sarah smiled and said she was proud of him. In that moment, Jackson knew he'd made the right choice. There was no going back. No forgiveness. Just an honest fresh start, built on the ruins of a trust that should never have been broken. And as he looked up at the stars, Jackson felt, for the first time in a long while, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.